Welcome to Olympian Method, the show where we ask the big questions in philosophy. Please, if you like the video, hit the like button. Also subscribe and hit the bell notification to get all updates on future content.
And please comment below with any of your thoughts.
Well, we're talking about something that I think everyone can relate to, which is relationships.
Very relatable.
And you mentioned in the break that you wanted to talk about the foundations of a healthy relationship versus how that looks compared to an unhealthy relationship. So
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on that?
It goes back to what you said in the first chapter, a little bit about codependency versus interdependency, because I think there's way too many people in this world, and I've been one of them in the past, who've been looking for that person to quote unquote complete them, which is, it sounds romantic and it's storybook, fairy tale type of deal.
Right.
But it's actually pretty unhealthy in the real world, because the way I like to think about it, or at least what's been taught to me as a healthier way to think about it, is that the relationship should not be, two incomplete people trying to mesh their incompleteness together, but it should be a third entity that the two individuals create is the relationship, and they both feed into the relationship, and they both it flows both ways, rather than them just directly trying to fill in each other's gaps, if that makes sense.
You said there's a third entity that they're kind of aiming at. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah.
You don't mean that literally, you have to make a child for a relationship.
No, I don't mean it in any physical sense. But what I mean is, you don't want to think about it as purely like a one-on-one type of thing, where it's you're keeping score, and it's I'm contributing, or you're not pulling your fair share, because at this moment you're not contributing the way I expect you to versus what I'm contributing. Whereas it's healthier to think of the relationship as this third entity, which is the thing that you feed energy into at some times, and you draw energy from at other times. But it's not like you're necessarily keeping score of what each person is feeding into it or taking out of it.
Right. Get kind of giving, but not asking anything in return. I mean, maybe that's an oversimplification. Yeah, I like what you say about kind of almost thinking about the relationship as almost like a third personality that you're choosing to combine with the other person that you're involved with. Right,
because it is its own identity, like we were talking about in the previous chapter, and I think treating it that way does have some benefits.
Can you describe what a relationship would look like that doesn't follow that model?
Yeah, I think it would be a lot of trying to say, I'm trying to think of thought experiments in my head about how this would manifest itself in the real world. But you didn't do the dishes like you said you would, and it's I had a really hard day, or what. You end up getting into these fights over very minute things, because you expect people to sort of hold up their end of the bargain without looking at the wider context of the overall thing that is the relationship that you're partaking in.
Right. So it's almost like controlling. Part of what I hear you saying is being in a healthy relationship, as far as you contributing to that, is having realistic expectations, and also not necessarily treating it like some sort of business entity.
But it's also the ability to sort of look at it from a wider perspective, from the forest for the trees, and not getting too bogged down in any of the day-to-day things that can lead to unnecessary conflict.
Right. Now obviously there are unhealthy relationships out there, just from a pure, I think that it is fair to say that objective unhealthy relationships do exist, right? And would you say that one of the ways those can manifest is that there's a very huge energy imbalance as far as how much time and effort one person is putting into maintaining that third entity versus another person?
Yeah, so that if there's truly an imbalance that holds across time, that will manifest itself in a problem with that third entity that I was talking about. But momentary, because there's going to be ups and downs within the relationship, and so the point is to manage surviving those by having this attitude is what I'm trying to get at here, rather than accepting that there can be an imbalance, because that's still going to eventually lead to problems down the road. It's just that's true over a longer time horizon than any one mistake someone makes, or like shortcomings of day-to-day activities, if that makes sense.
Right. So I think it's what I hear you saying is that having an almost long-term goal for a relationship, or a long-term, like, not mission statement, because that makes it sound business-like, but like, I think a long-term goal for a relationship is that's agreed upon between the two individuals is kind of what's necessary. And maybe the institution of marriage is something that kind of to some extent fills that gap. But I did have another question about this whole healthy versus unhealthy relationship thing, because we're looking at it largely from the context of a society that really only for the past 100 years has chosen to choose relationships on the basis of love. And
that's true.
And not this sort of arranged marriage model, which actually majority of cultures still kind of employ, where, the parents are kind of serviced.
And I believe there are cultures that are still somewhat employing that to some degree today. It's not completely gone.
Yeah, it's not completely gone. I'm sure there's hybridizations of it. I know that in like a Romani, or like Gypsy, like people who are actually ethnically Gypsy, like intermarry with each other, based on the basis of these organized, preordained, how do I say it, family marriages.
Yeah, not to mention there were marriages of like political convenience when it comes to the various royal families and things like that in the past, right?
Yeah. Well,
and so you had brought up a point off air that I wanted to bring up, which is that even though we've had this supposed freedom to marry for love, it's still resulting in divorce like half of the time, something like that. So
right.
I'm not sure we're great at picking love, even if we think we have the freedom to do so.
And I don't want to get into a point of like correlation versus causality here, but I think there's a multivariate reason for why there's divorces happening. Obviously, we can't get into all of those here, but as far as like choosing for love, I do think to some extent the romantic interest that we have for one another is like when it does happen, when obviously you can't force chemistry, but when that chemistry is present, it can be kind of blinding in a way. And when we look to things like Greek mythology, Eros versus Platonic style relationships, I mean, Eros it almost means madness, doesn't it?
Right. And I've heard some of the Platonic dialogues that relate to the notion of love, and they do talk about it in different kinds of madness. And there's the notion of sort of your emotions taking over your control of your mind is like one aspect of that. And there's almost like I don't want to call it like a divine inspiration, but there is some sort of divine like muse that sort of is controlling that aspect of you that they mention.
Yeah, it's almost like the idealized version of the person that you're interested in is controlling you rather than the person itself. In a way, you've almost mythologized the other person, and it's almost like a form of fantasy fulfillment. I feel like love is like it is in many parts that romantic style love. I mean, Romeo and Juliet is a perfect example. I think Shakespeare was very psychologically poignant in a lot of his plays, underlying like family dynamics and politics. But in terms of relationships, that science actually agrees with a lot of the underlying themes in Romeo and Juliet of like love at first sight. Like I think they say that it only takes about less than a second of you actually making eye contact with another individual to find out if you're actually attracted to them or in love with them. So,
well, see, I think we should separate those two, because we think of them as being this concept of love at first sight, but I'm not sure do you think that's really is that really a thing?
I think that because it takes your brain about that long to process, I think, whether or not you can actually fantasize about that individual. And I think that if you don't start doing it almost immediately, then it almost kind of doesn't happen, or it takes a while for it to happen. But anyway,
I was trying to get at, is that just a step before achieving actual love, or are you saying that you've already achieved that state in your mind that quickly?
I almost wonder if that kind of erotic love is kind of almost an illusion, like that's a biological trick in a way. Like I can't everybody raise your hand if you've ever met that person who you didn't really know that well, but you immediately started fantasizing about a future with them.
Maybe a little bit.
And like maybe you imagine marriage or kids, and it's like it happened really early on, and it's like, yeah, I think that's what madness is, and I think that's kind of what love is. I mean, and it's almost like when it's you, like there's nothing of really, yes, the other person is making you think those things or inspiring you to think about those things. I should be clear, but it's all happening within your own mind, that kind of idealization. And it's like, that is not a good foundation for building a long-term relationship with someone, because technically you can fantasize about anybody if you choose to.
Well, right. And the part I'm most concerned about there is how well do you really know them other than the surface level features that you are experiencing or, you're perceiving.
Right. I think we can all, I want to turn this on a comedic direction. Obviously, we've all heard of the Reddit subforum of r/Tinder, which I actually think is kind of an interesting meta commentary on how dating goes these days. But it's online dating, as we mentioned in the previous episode, is, online dating is very similar to social media. It has a very much of an overlap with social media, and it almost kind of commodifies the idea of a relationship with people, in my opinion. And you see all of these ways that people try to get each other's interest that just seem kind of placid or kind of fake, or it's almost like a game to them. They almost don't really care about the relationship. They make posts just so they can, forums on Reddit where they can post all the funny things that were said on their dating site.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious if you have like a gut feeling, is online dating been a net positive or negative for like relationships and overall dating and all that sort of thing? Like, has it been helpful or has it been hurtful more?
Well, I think it's been largely hurtful, I think, in a lot of ways.
Okay.
Part of the reason for that is that I think it has commodified people in a lot of ways. Like, and there's a joke saying that if you're not at least a 9 out of 10, don't use online dating. But I've seen a lot of these stories where it's like there's a fairly attractive man or a fairly attractive woman that get on Tinder, and it's like it's so easy for them to hook up with people and to have this kind of physical intimacy with people without necessarily getting to know them or without even having an agreement about a long-term future with one another. And
but I have a question about, so isn't that a phenomenon that's existed also in the real world and doesn't need to be facilitated by any sort of online marketplace?
True, but I think that the online dating world has just helped take advantage of whatever cultural norms that we have that already allowed that and made that process easier. So the root of the problem, I think, is in our culture, not necessarily in the technology that we use to facilitate that culture, although the technology makes all problems worse.
Yeah, I'm trying to look at more of the positive side of this, because it seems like it gives you, because dating is obviously a numbers game. We all know that, and it gives you exposure to potentially more potential matches than you would otherwise get if you were out, like at a bar, for example.
This is true. Although I do think this is something I've been reflecting on just personally. Is I think in a lot of situations with men and women, if a man does not make a move first, the relationship usually doesn't have a very long-lasting appeal, because actually women prefer men who are assertive and make the first move. And so part of what online dating does is it allows, I think, for an even greater opportunity for women to make that first move, which kind of, I don't know, subconsciously kind of underwrites these evolutionarily determined biological mechanisms that determine attractiveness to begin with. So
usually they're built around like a mutual move. Like they have to both opt in order for a match to be made, except for like Bumble, I guess is,
Yeah, I'm thinking of Bumble, and I have never had good luck with Bumble. Just saying. But back to responsibility, because I don't want to get too lost down the social media train of things, but what's an acceptable level of responsibility to take in a relationship? Obviously, you can't take on more responsibility than is healthy for you. So it's really a question of what's a healthy amount of responsibility for you to take, rather than what's like a healthy person to be with.
Yeah, I'd like to hear what your perspective is on what makes a healthy relationship.
Well, so as far as responsibilities go, I think it's a far cry to say, no, I think it's reasonable to say, rather, that you cannot be held accountable for the emotions of other people. I feel like in a codependent relationship, which is not an interdependent relationship, there's a difference. Codependency, as far as what I understand, is the dependency that happens when both people hold the other person accountable for how they're feeling, right? So somebody might be saying, oh, I'm having a bad day, I don't feel good. And the other person says, oh, it makes me sad that you're having a bad day.
Yeah, it seems like you're basically, it's a form of emotional manipulation, it seems like to me.
Almost kind of, yeah. And it's almost like, and it's both party, a codependency, I think, requires two to tango. It's not like, it's a mutual manipulation, I think is what it is. And I think it's kind of born out of the idea of maybe you're a people pleaser and you were kind of raised in that environment where it's like you had parents who made you kind of feel bad if they weren't having such a great day or something like that. I think that's how it carries over. But regardless of that, I think being aware of that and using it to establish healthy boundaries in yourself, one of the ways that I'm trying to do that is to make myself realize, like, I'm not responsible for other people's emotions unless I've done something, obviously, but it's important to really know what it is that you're responsible for in your own life, I think, before you get into a relationship with someone else. Because if you don't have a clear sense of identity and responsibility of just yourself in your own life, in this American culture where we are kind of like very individualistic and in these boxes, that's just the way it is. That's how we work here. It's, unless you have unless you're taking care of yourself, it's really hard to take care of somebody else. And I think a relationship is defined as showing up to be of service to other people, having taken care of yourself first.
Right. And that sort of goes back to what I was talking about, being like not trying to look for someone to complete you. I think the first step should be making yourself a whole person. And I think a lot of people need to work on themselves before. I think another approach I've heard people talk about relationships is that the relationship should be like a very welcome bonus in your life, but it should not be the focus of your life.
Right.
There should still be that core that is you and is not your whole definition of you is wrapped up in someone else, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Although I do think relationships get much more complicated when you throw children into the mix. Obviously, I don't think either of us have kids, but
no, haven't been there. But I understand that that leads to a lot of complications, especially when it comes to the various laws involved and what do you call it? Custody and stuff like that.
Right. Well, it's almost like choosing to have a child with someone. I mean, it's a really noble cause because it furthers the species, but it's also furthering you. It's furthering your partner in a way. It's ensuring like a future that you have to work towards. And so I feel like it's like if that's removed from the equation, it almost makes having the idea of a healthy relationship seems like a moot point to argue unless you are sort of working towards that goal of eventually bringing a new life into this world or multiple new lives into this world. Does that make sense? It's almost like that does seem kind of like to be like the ultimate goal from at least an evolutionary standpoint and from a survival standpoint is to reproduce.
I agree with you historically, but I think once we got to the age of modern medicine and we started having various forms of birth control and others, I think that is in the process of changing that whole equation very dramatically.
It kind of almost trivialized the need for relationships in a way? Or?
I don't know if it trivialized it, but I think we're in the middle of an experiment to see how it changes what it means to be in a relationship when it's now kind of optional where that goes.
This is making my head spin, man. I don't have any answers. Do you guys have answers? I mean, I don't know what I'll just share a story. Like I
sure
knew somebody who, maybe they kind of married for love, maybe they didn't, but they were married for a very, very long time. And it actually took a while for them to for the woman at least to learn how to love her husband. It took a long time, but it was like eventually they started to grow and learn how to work together and respect each other. And I think what makes a healthy relationship is that you do there needs to be almost kind of like a mutual giving mentality rather than looking to see what you can take from each other, looking to see what you can give to each other without undercutting yourself. And it's like, I don't know. I think if you don't respect the person you're with, that should be a red flag. I don't think that you should ever be with somebody whose values you can't get behind, whose personality doesn't mesh with yours, who makes off life decisions you don't agree with. I mean, I think regardless of whatever emotions you have towards a person, objectively speaking, if they don't have the same lifestyle as you, it's just not going to work. Like if one's a heavy drinker and one doesn't like alcohol, that's not going to work. If one does drugs and the other one doesn't, that's not going to work. If one believes in God and that's an important part of their life and the other one doesn't, that's not going to work. I mean, you need to have an idea of like giving to each other rather, and it's really hard to do that when your lifestyles don't match up. So I think that's the simplest explanation.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to close our chapter with that then.
I know we're like 5 minutes over, right?
Yeah, it's okay.
All right, well, Olympians, leave your comments down below. Let us know what you think a healthy relationship is. Let us know what you think an unhealthy relationship is. Tell your stories.
Yeah, let us know if you've been in any of those, because I know I have.
I know I have too. All right, later, Olympians.
Bye.